In the heart of an elegant first-class cabin, tensions brew unexpectedly. A poised and confident black couple quietly takes their seats, but for one flight attendant, deeply ingrained prejudice clouds her perspective. With subtle yet unmistakable assumptions, she sets off a chain of events that quickly spirals out of control. What unfolds in the next 3 minutes will challenge biases, restore dignity, and leave everyone watching with an unforgettable lesson. Before diving into this gripping story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you enjoy tales of resilience, justice, and transformation, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. Your support helps amplify these crucial messages. Now, let's embark on this unforgettable journey. The bustling early morning scene at Eversfield International Airport was alive with the clamor of hurried footsteps, rolling suitcases, and soft airport announcements. Yet, within the tranquil confines of the Azure Sky Lounge, a different atmosphere reigned, one of refined luxury. Polished marble floors reflected the warm glow of intricate light fixtures, while the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air. Travelers reclined in plush chairs, their expressions serene as they flipped through newspapers or tapped on sleek laptops. Among the lounge's patrons were Jonathan and Camille Parker, a couple whose quiet presence spoke volumes. Jonathan, dressed in a sharp blazer and tailored jeans, exuded effortless confidence. Camille, in an elegant but understated blouse and slacks, carried herself with a grace that drew subtle glances. Though accustomed to spaces like this, they were no strangers to the unspoken biases that often accompanied their presence. As they approached the concierge desk, a young attendant greeted them with a polished yet slightly hesitant smile. "Good morning," she said, her tone professional but betraying a flicker of doubt. "May I see your boarding passes?" Jonathan handed her the tickets without a word, his expression calm. Her eyes darted to the first-class designation, and for a brief moment, an unreadable expression crossed her face. Curiosity, perhaps even skepticism. Quickly, she composed herself and returned the tickets with a brighter smile. "Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Parker. Enjoy your time in the lounge." As they moved toward a quieter corner, Camille leaned toward Jonathan, her voice low. "Did you catch that?" Jonathan gave a faint smile. "I did, but it's nothing new," he replied. "It never is." They settled into their seats, appearing relaxed but internally alert. This wasn't a simple vacation. For Jonathan, CEO of Ascend Airways, and Camille, the company's CFO, this was a carefully orchestrated undercover operation. Reports of discriminatory practices within their airline's first-class service had reached their desk, and they were determined to uncover the truth firsthand. Camille pulled out her tablet, scrolling through recent board meeting notes. "The data doesn't lie," she murmured. "Customer satisfaction scores are significantly lower for minority passengers in first class. We need to understand why." Jonathan leaned back, his gaze sweeping the room. "We will," he said firmly. "Not as executives, but as customers. Let's see how deep this problem runs." Their conversation was interrupted by a sharply dressed lounge attendant who exuded warmth and professionalism, an immediate contrast to the earlier interaction. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker," the man greeted them with a genuine smile. "Can I get you something to drink? Coffee? Tea? Perhaps a mimosa?" "Just coffee for me," Camille said with a polite smile. "Make that too," Jonathan added. The attendant nodded and disappeared as swiftly as he'd arrived, leaving the couple alone once more. As Camille sipped her coffee, her eyes scanned the lounge. Most passengers were absorbed in their own activities, but a few lingered just a moment too long. It wasn't overt hostility, more a subtle curiosity that silently asked, "Do they belong here?" Jonathan caught her gaze and, reading her expression, said quietly, "Let them wonder." Just then, the soft chime of the boarding announcement cut through the lounge, signaling the start of their journey. A journey not only to their destination, but toward uncovering a truth that could transform their airline's culture forever. The boarding announcement came sooner than expected. As Jonathan and Camille Parker made their way to the gate, the same concierge who had greeted them earlier offered a brief, almost apologetic smile. They stepped onto the plane and were met by a flight attendant who barely spared them a glance before directing them to their first-class seats. Nearby stood Nancy, the lead flight attendant, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in the couple. Jonathan and Camille moved with a practiced ease, their demeanor polished yet unassuming. Nancy approached them with a perfunctory smile. "Good morning," she said, her tone polite but edged with something less friendly. "Can I get you anything before takeoff?" Camille shook her head with a polite smile. "We're fine for now, thank you." Nancy lingered just a moment too long, her gaze flicking between the two. "If you need anything, let me know," she said, her smile tight as she walked away. Camille turned to Jonathan, her voice low. "And so it begins." Jonathan didn't respond, his focus on the safety demonstration, but Camille noticed the slight tension in his jaw and the rhythmic tapping of his fingers on the armrest, a telltale sign of his restrained frustration. They had prepared for moments like this, yet the sting of bias was something no amount of planning could dull entirely. As the plane climbed to cruising altitude, Nancy's voice came over the intercom, crisply announcing the start of in-flight services. Jonathan and Camille exchanged a glance, silently bracing themselves. This wasn't their first time confronting such subtle discrimination, but each encounter was a fresh reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. What Nancy didn't yet realize was the pivotal role she was about to play, not just in their journey, but in the transformation of their airline's culture. From her vantage point near the galley, Nancy's sharp gaze followed the couple. A faint smirk tugged at her lips. "Let's see how long they last," she muttered to a fellow crew member, setting the stage for what would become an unforgettable confrontation. The first-class cabin of Ascend Airways Flight 142 radiated sophistication. Gleaming wood-paneled accents framed the space, leather seats provided ample legroom, and soft jazz played in the background. For most passengers, this environment promised luxury and exclusivity. But for Jonathan and Camille, it was yet another stage where unspoken judgments would surface. Nancy moved briskly through the cabin, her demeanor efficient but laced with subtle tension. Her uniform was pristine, her blonde hair meticulously pinned back, and her smile carefully practiced. She had fought hard to rise through the ranks, overcoming personal and professional challenges. Yet deep within, biases she rarely questioned simmered, now surfacing as she observed the couple in seats 3A and 3B. "They don't exactly scream first class, do they?" Nancy whispered to Elise, a younger flight attendant assisting with meal service. Elise frowned, her tone cautious. "They're passengers just like anyone else." Nancy shrugged dismissively. "Maybe, but I've seen plenty of people try to sneak into first class. You can always tell who belongs and who doesn't." Meanwhile, Jonathan and Camille remained composed in their seats, though the tension in the air was palpable. Camille opened her tablet, pretending to read while her sharp eyes discreetly observed the cabin. Jonathan, ever calm on the surface, tapped lightly on the armrest, a subtle habit that Camille recognized. "She's watching us," Camille murmured without looking up. Jonathan's lips curved into a faint smirk. "Let her. We're not here to make her comfortable." As the meal service began, another flight attendant approached their seats, her smile genuine and unforced. "Would you like a glass of champagne or orange juice before the meal service begins?" Camille returned the kind smile. "Just water, thank you." "I'll take the same," Jonathan added. As the attendant walked away, Nancy passed by, her gaze lingering on their untouched drinks. She paused, her expression still tightly controlled. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, her tone dripping with politeness but noticeably insincere. "Everything's fine," Jonathan replied evenly, meeting her gaze without flinching. Nancy hesitated, clearly expecting a different response. "Well, if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask," she said, her smile taut before walking away. Camille glanced at Jonathan, her voice low but tinged with dry humor. "She's trying to figure us out." "She doesn't need to," Jonathan replied calmly. "She's already decided." "She's trying to figure us out," Camille murmured softly, her voice just loud enough for Jonathan to hear. "She doesn't need to," Jonathan replied evenly, his gaze steady. "She already has." Back in the galley, Nancy's unease grew. Over her years of serving countless passengers, most interactions had been routine, transactional affairs. Yet, something about Jonathan and Camille unsettled her. They didn't fit the image of first-class travelers that she had come to expect. No flashy luggage, no ostentatious displays of wealth. Instead, their quiet confidence seemed out of place, almost like a challenge to her ingrained assumptions. Are they bothering you? Asked Elise, the younger flight attendant, noticing Nancy's furrowed brow. No, Nancy answered quickly. Too quickly, but people like them don't usually fly up here, you know? Elise frowned. People like them? You know what I mean, Nancy said defensively. I'm not being rude, it's just unusual. Elise didn't reply, but her disapproval was evident. Without another word, she turned back to her duties, leaving Nancy alone with her thoughts. Meanwhile, in their seats, Jonathan and Camille continued to attract glances from nearby passengers. A middle-aged man across the aisle adjusted his glasses, pretending to read, but clearly eavesdropping. Ahead of them, an older woman leaned toward her companion, whispering behind a manicured hand. Camille let out a quiet sigh. Do you ever get tired of this? She asked, gesturing subtly around the cabin. The whispers, the stares, the unspoken judgments. Jonathan leaned back, his expression thoughtful. It's not about proving anything, he replied. It's about showing them that their assumptions don't define us. Camille smiled faintly, her admiration for him shining through. And that's why I married you, she said softly. As the meal service began, Nancy took it upon herself to personally serve Jonathan and Camille. She approached with exaggerated politeness, her tray balanced carefully in her hands. Mr. and Mrs. Parker, she began smoothly, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. We have a selection of entrees today: roasted salmon, grilled chicken, or vegetarian pasta. What can I get for you? I'll have the salmon, Camille said calmly. The chicken for me, Jonathan added. Excellent, Nancy replied, jotting down their choices before walking away. Her steps were brisk, but Camille leaned toward Jonathan as she departed. Did you see the way she looked at us? Camille asked. I saw, Jonathan replied evenly. But let her play her game. She'll reveal herself soon enough. Behind the curtain separating first class from the galley, Nancy whispered to her colleague Evan, a senior flight attendant in his 40s. I'm telling you, something about them doesn't add up, Nancy said, her voice low but charged with conviction. They're too composed. Evan frowned. What are you saying? I don't know, Nancy admitted, crossing her arms. But I've seen people fake their way into first class before. Maybe they swapped tickets with someone. Evan shook his head, unimpressed. You're overthinking this, Nancy. Just do your job. Nancy bristled, but didn't respond. Deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was right. And she was determined to prove it. Returning to the cabin, Nancy's gaze once again settled on Jonathan and Camille. This time, her professional mask slipped slightly, revealing the growing storm beneath. If they think they can fool me, she thought, they've got another thing coming. The hum of conversation in the cabin quieted as Nancy moved deliberately toward their seats. Her expression was set with a determination that signaled trouble ahead. Nearby passengers began to sense the rising tension. Their curiosity piqued. Jonathan sat with his arms crossed, his focus on the glowing in-flight map. From the corner of her eye, Camille noticed Nancy's approach and placed a calming hand on Jonathan's arm. Stay steady, she whispered. I always do, Jonathan replied, his voice calm but firm. Without looking directly at Nancy, he leaned back slightly, bracing himself for what was to come. Excuse me, Nancy said sharply, her voice loud enough to turn heads. She stood beside their seats, clipboard in hand, her eyes narrowing as she addressed the couple. There seems to be some confusion, she began. Camille looked up, her expression calm but questioning. Confusion? She echoed. Nancy's lips tightened. Yes, she said. I've double-checked the seating manifest, and your names aren't listed for these seats. I don't see your names on the manifest for these seats. Are you sure you're in the right section? Nancy asked, her tone laced with a quiet challenge. The words hung in the air, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. Jonathan looked up, his expression calm and unflinching. Our boarding passes say 3A and 3B, he said simply. Perhaps you'd like to check again. Nancy's lips pressed into a thin line as she glanced at her clipboard, flipping through the pages with exaggerated diligence. It's possible there's been a mistake at the gate, she said, her voice veiled with strained professionalism. We do get mix-ups from time to time. Camille tilted her head slightly, her voice steady but sharp. So you're suggesting the mistake is ours? I'm suggesting, Nancy said, her tone tightening, that it's unusual to see passengers unfamiliar with first-class protocols. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their initial curiosity giving way to unease. A man across the aisle cleared his throat, but remained silent, while an older woman in the row ahead gripped her armrest, glancing back over her shoulder. Jonathan exchanged a quick look with Camille before speaking again, his voice calm but authoritative. "Nancy, is it?" "That's correct," she replied, her smile thin and forced. "Nancy," Jonathan continued, "my wife and I have flown first class on Ascend Airways more times than I can count. I assure you, there's no mistake." Nancy's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't back down. Instead, she gestured toward the boarding passes on the tray table. "May I see those again, please?" Jonathan leaned forward deliberately, picking up the tickets and handing them to her without a word. Nancy scrutinized them closely, as if searching for evidence of forgery. Her frown deepened as the moment stretched, and finally, she handed the passes back. "Well," she said, her tone clipped, "these appear to be valid, but it's still highly irregular." "Highly irregular?" Camille echoed, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "In what way?" Nancy hesitated, her composure beginning to slip. "I'm just saying, it's unusual. Passengers who don't fit the typical profile." "Profile?" Jonathan interjected, his voice cutting cleanly through the cabin's strained silence. "What exactly is the typical profile, Nancy?" The question hung in the air, heavy and pointed. Nancy's mouth opened as if to respond, but no words came. Her confidence faltered under Jonathan's steady gaze, and the discomfort among the surrounding passengers grew. Whispers and exchanged glances rippled through the cabin. At that moment, Elise, the younger flight attendant, stepped forward, her expression strained but composed. She gently placed a hand on Nancy's arm. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her voice a careful balance of concern and warning. Nancy stiffened. "Everything's fine," she said quickly. "I'm just clarifying some seating issues." Elise turned to Jonathan and Camille, her expression apologetic. "I'm so sorry for any inconvenience," she said softly. "If there's anything you need, please let me know." Jonathan inclined his head slightly. "Thank you, Elise. We're fine." As Elise walked away, Nancy's composure began to crack. Her voice dropped to a murmur, audible only to Jonathan and Camille. "I don't know how you managed this, but it won't last. People notice when something doesn't belong." Camille's hand tightened slightly on the armrest, her calm exterior steadying the tension she felt within. She didn't respond, her eyes fixed on Nancy. Jonathan, however, leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "Nancy," he said, his voice low but commanding, "I suggest you think very carefully about what you're implying." Nancy blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "I'm not implying anything," she said quickly, though her tone betrayed her uncertainty. Jonathan's expression softened just slightly, but his voice remained firm. "Then perhaps it's time to stop this conversation before it goes any further." The silence that followed was thick and palpable, broken only by the faint hum of the engines. Nancy, visibly flustered, straightened her uniform and stepped back. "I'll be back to check on you later," she said stiffly before turning away. Camille exhaled slowly, her grip on the armrest loosening. "That could have gone worse," she said quietly. "It's not over," Jonathan replied, his tone measured, "but it will be soon." In the galley, Nancy leaned against the counter, her frustration bubbling over. "Who do they think they are?" she muttered under her breath. Elise, who had overheard, frowned. "Nancy, you're crossing a line, let it go." "I can't," Nancy snapped, her voice low but seething. "They're making a mockery of everything this cabin stands for." Elise shook her head, her tone firm but calm. "Maybe it's time to ask yourself why you think that." Nancy didn't reply, but her jaw tightened. She wasn't ready to let go of her assumptions, not yet. This time, Jonathan was ready. As Nancy approached again, clipboard in hand, he rose calmly to his feet. His movements were deliberate, his expression unreadable as he reached into the pocket of his blazer. "Perhaps you should know exactly who you're speaking to," he said, his voice steady but charged with authority. The cabin, already subdued by tension, fell completely silent as he revealed a sleek black card embossed with the Ascend Airways logo and a platinum designation. The sight of it made Nancy freeze in her tracks, her professional mask slipping entirely. Jonathan handed the card to her, his gaze unwavering. "That," he said, his tone measured, is my personal credentials as the CEO of Ascend Airways, and this, he gestured toward Camille, is Camille Parker, our CFO. Nancy's face turned ashen. Her hands trembled slightly as she stared at the card, her mind scrambling to process the revelation. The murmurs among passengers grew louder, disbelief and astonishment rippling through the cabin like a wave. You're, Nancy stammered, unable to complete the sentence. Yes, Jonathan confirmed, his voice firm but devoid of anger. We are the people responsible for ensuring that Ascend Airways upholds its values of dignity, respect, and fairness, values you have failed to embody today. The murmurs intensified as passengers processed what they had just heard. A man seated across the aisle leaned back in his chair, his eyes wide. The older woman ahead, who had been whispering with her companion, now sat stiffly, glancing back with an expression of shock. From the cockpit doorway, the captain stepped forward. His expression was a mix of professionalism and concern as he addressed the couple directly. Mr. Parker, Mrs. Parker, he began, his voice steady. On behalf of the entire crew, I sincerely apologize for this unacceptable behavior. Jonathan gave the captain a curt nod, his gaze still fixed on Nancy. Thank you, Captain, he said. But this isn't just about us. It's about what this moment represents. The captain turned to Nancy, his tone firm but controlled. Nancy, you are relieved of your duties for the remainder of this flight. Please gather your belongings and return to the galley. Nancy's eyes widened in shock. But Captain, No arguments. The captain interrupted, his voice brooking no dissent. Your actions have consequences. Nancy stood frozen, her mind racing as the weight of the moment crashed down on her. She opened her mouth to protest, but quickly realized that further resistance would only make matters worse. As Nancy retreated toward the galley, her head bowed in humiliation, the atmosphere in the cabin began to shift. Some passengers exchanged awkward glances, others looked down at their laps, uncomfortable with the confrontation they had just witnessed. A few offered Jonathan and Camille small nods of respect, as if acknowledging the injustice they had endured. The captain addressed the Parkers again. If there's anything I can do to make this right, please don't hesitate to let me know. Camille offered a polite but firm smile. Thank you, Captain. Your swift response speaks volumes. Jonathan's expression softened slightly. We appreciate your professionalism, he added, his tone calm but resolute. As the captain returned to the cockpit, Camille exhaled slowly, her grip on the armrest finally relaxing. Well, she said quietly to Jonathan, that escalated quickly. Jonathan nodded, his voice low but resolute. It needed to. This isn't just about us. It's about setting a standard for everyone watching. As Nancy retreated to the galley, visibly shaken, the captain turned back to Jonathan and Camille Parker, his demeanor professional yet sincere. I deeply apologize, he said, his voice steady. If there's anything we can do to make this right, please don't hesitate to let me know. Jonathan's expression softened slightly, though his tone remained resolute. Your response speaks volumes, Captain, he said. Thank you for addressing this swiftly. As Nancy disappeared into the galley, the atmosphere in the cabin began to shift. The tension that had filled the space moments before began to dissipate, replaced by a quieter, more contemplative energy. Some passengers looked genuinely ashamed, their glances a mix of discomfort and regret. Others offered Jonathan and Camille apologetic smiles or small nods of support. Elise, the younger flight attendant, approached cautiously, her face flushed with embarrassment. Mr. and Mrs. Parker, she began hesitantly, her voice low. I'm so sorry for what just happened. Please know that this doesn't reflect how we all feel. Camille's smile was kind but reserved. Thank you, Elise, she replied. It takes courage to speak up. Relief washed over Elise's face as she nodded. If there's anything I can do, just let me know. Jonathan inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement, and Elise returned to her duties. The plane continued its journey, the engines humming softly. For a time, Jonathan and Camille sat in silence, the weight of the incident settling over them. Finally, Camille broke the quiet. Do you think she'll learn from this? She asked, her voice thoughtful. Jonathan considered the question, his gaze distant. I hope so, he said. But whether she does or not, this was a moment we needed, not just for her, but for everyone watching. Camille nodded slowly. It's never just about one person, is it? No, Jonathan agreed, his voice steady. It's about changing the whole system. one step at a time. In the galley, Nancy leaned against the counter, her hands gripping its edge so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her mind replayed the confrontation in an endless loop, each word from Jonathan cutting deeper into her confidence. The card, the title, the authority. It had been a blow she hadn't anticipated. Elise entered the galley, her movements cautious but purposeful. "Nancy," she said gently, her voice soft but firm. "Are you okay?" Nancy didn't look up. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought I was doing my job. I didn't think." Her words trailed off, catching in her throat. "That's the problem," Elise replied gently but pointedly. "You didn't think, you assumed." Nancy's eyes snapped up to meet Elise's. There was no malice in Elise's expression, only quiet disappointment. "You're better than this," Elise added before turning and walking away. Nancy remained frozen, the weight of Elise's words pressing down on her. For the first time, she began to question not only her actions, but the beliefs that had shaped them. Meanwhile, the captain approached Jonathan and Camille's seats once more, his tone still apologetic but more resolved. "Mr. Parker, Mrs. Parker," he said, "I want to assure you that this situation is being addressed. Nancy's behavior does not reflect the values of Ascend Airways." Jonathan nodded, his tone measured. "I appreciate that, Captain," he said, "but addressing one person's actions isn't enough. This is about the culture we've allowed to take root." The captain hesitated, then nodded in understanding. "I see your point, sir. If there's anything further I can do to make this right, please let me know." Camille offered a polite but firm smile. "Your swift response is appreciated. It's a start." As the captain walked away, a middle-aged man seated across the aisle leaned slightly toward Jonathan. His expression was kind but hesitant, and his voice was quiet. "Excuse me," he said. "I just wanted to say thank you for handling that the way you did." Jonathan turned to him, his brow lifting slightly in surprise. "Thank you for saying so," he replied, his tone sincere. The man glanced down at his hands, fumbling for words. "I've been flying for years, and I've seen things that weren't right, but I never spoke up. Seeing you stand your ground like that, it makes me think I should have done more." Jonathan's expression softened. "It's never too late to start," he said simply. The man nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe next time," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. Across the cabin, passengers exchanged whispers, their conversations laced with reflection. Some seemed genuinely inspired, while others grappled with the discomfort of what they had witnessed. Slowly but surely, the ripples of the confrontation began to spread, hinting at the possibility of broader change. The man across the aisle nodded at Jonathan, his face thoughtful. "Maybe next time," he murmured softly, more to himself than to anyone else. Elsewhere in the cabin, conversations began to spark among passengers. Some quietly expressed admiration for how Jonathan and Camille had handled the situation. Others muttered criticisms tinged with discomfort. "Did you see the way they humiliated her?" a woman murmured to her seatmate, her tone disapproving. "It was uncalled for." Her companion frowned. "Uncalled for?" She brought it on herself. "They didn't humiliate her. They told the truth." "That truth was a little too convenient, don't you think?" the woman countered. "It's easy to play the victim when you have power." Her companion shook his head, his tone firm. "Power didn't put them in those seats. They earned it. Maybe it's time we stop assuming we know everything about people based on how they look." The woman fell silent, her expression conflicted, as if wrestling with a perspective she hadn't considered before. In the galley, Nancy remained rooted to the spot, her thoughts churning. The door to the crew rest area opened, and the captain stepped inside, his arms folded and his expression serious. "Nancy," he said, his voice firm but calm, "we need to talk." Nancy straightened instinctively, her professional demeanor kicking in despite the turmoil inside her. "Yes, Captain," she said. "What happened out there was unacceptable. You crossed a line, several lines in fact, but I need to know. Do you understand why?" Nancy hesitated, her mind racing as she struggled to find the right words. I thought I was protecting the integrity of the cabin," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. The captain's eyes narrowed slightly. "Protecting it from what? From whom?" Nancy looked away, unable to meet his gaze. After a moment, she admitted quietly, "I didn't think they belonged." "And that," the captain said, his tone heavy with disappointment, "is the problem. Your assumptions didn't just insult two of our most important leaders, they undermined the values we stand for as a company." Nancy's eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them back quickly. "I didn't mean to," she began, her voice breaking. "Intent doesn't matter here," the captain interrupted gently. "Impact does, and the impact of your actions today was damaging, not just to them, but to everyone who saw it happen." Nancy nodded slowly, her composure starting to crack under the weight of his words. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You're being relieved of duty for the rest of this flight," the captain said firmly. "When we land, there will be a formal review. It's up to you whether this moment becomes the end of your career or the start of something better." With that, he turned and left, leaving Nancy alone with her thoughts. Back in their seats, Jonathan and Camille exchanged a quiet look. Camille's voice was soft but resolute. "Do you think she'll change?" Jonathan leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "She has a choice to make," he said. "Whether she learns from this is up to her. But the fact that she's questioning herself, that's the first step." Camille nodded, her hand resting lightly on Jonathan's arm. "Then maybe this wasn't just about us," she said. "Maybe it's about everyone who saw it happen." Jonathan smiled faintly. "It always is." As the plane neared its destination, the tension in the first-class cabin began to ease, replaced by a quieter, more contemplative energy. Conversations that had been whispered and hesitant now carried tones of reflection, and for some, awkward self-awareness. Camille leaned slightly toward Jonathan. "You can feel it, can't you?" she murmured. Jonathan nodded subtly. "Moments like this always leave an impression," he said, "whether people want to admit it or not." In the galley, Nancy sat on a fold-down seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her clipboard lay forgotten on the counter beside her, a silent reminder of how the day had unraveled. The captain's words replayed in her mind, each sentence chipping away at the wall of denial she had built around herself. The soft sound of footsteps made her look up. Elise entered the galley, her expression hesitant but resolute. "Nancy?" she said quietly. Nancy's eyes, red-rimmed but dry, met Elise's. "I messed up, didn't I?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elise leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "Yeah," she said gently but firmly. "You did." "You did," Elise said gently, crossing her arms as she leaned against the counter. "But the fact that you're asking that question means something. A lot of people wouldn't even get this far." Nancy managed a weak smile, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know how to fix it." "You start by listening," Elise replied softly. "To yourself, to others, and you stop assuming you already know everything about the people around you." Nancy nodded slowly, the weight of her mistakes settling heavily on her shoulders. For the first time, she didn't just feel regret, she felt a flicker of determination to do better. Meanwhile, the passengers in first class continued to process the events of the flight. Near the front, an elderly woman leaned toward her companion, her voice soft but resolute. "I've seen things like this before," she said. "Back in the day, no one would have said anything, but now there's a chance to make things right." Her companion, a younger man with a laptop balanced on his knees, nodded. "It's uncomfortable," he admitted, "but maybe that's a good thing. People need to feel uncomfortable before they can grow." Across the aisle, a middle-aged couple exchanged quiet words. "We teach our kids about respect," the husband said. "But it's moments like this that remind us how much we still have to learn ourselves." In their seats, Jonathan and Camille remained composed, though their minds were far from at rest. Camille glanced at the screen displaying the flight's progress before turning to Jonathan. "What do you think will happen when we land?" she asked. Jonathan considered the question carefully. "There will be fallout," he said. "Not just for Nancy, but for the company. This isn't just about one incident, it's a reflection of deeper issues. And now, everyone knows we're aware of it." Camille nodded. "Do you think they'll try to sweep it under the rug?" "They can't," Jonathan replied firmly. "We won't let them." As the plane began its descent, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and all carry-on items are stowed. On behalf of Ascend Airways, thank you for flying with us today." The announcement stirred the cabin into quiet activity as passengers prepared for landing. Nancy emerged from the galley, her steps hesitant but purposeful. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her as she approached Jonathan and Camille's seats. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I wanted to apologize. I know words can't undo what happened, but I need you to know, I'm sorry." Jonathan regarded her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his tone steady and measured. "Acknowledging the problem is a start, Nancy. What matters now is what you do next." Nancy nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I'll do better," she said, her voice earnest. "I promise." Camille offered a small smile, her voice soft but firm. "Promises are important," she said, "but actions speak louder." As the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, passengers began gathering their belongings. Many cast glances toward Jonathan and Camille, their expressions ranging from admiration to quiet reflection. Some paused to offer words of support as they passed. "Thank you for what you did," one woman said. "It gave me a lot to think about." Another passenger, the man who had spoken to Jonathan earlier, stopped briefly. "You didn't just stand up for yourselves," he said. "You stood up for all of us." Jonathan inclined his head slightly. "We all have a part to play," he replied. In the terminal, the corporate response team waited nervously for Jonathan and Camille's arrival. Dressed in crisp suits and carrying tablets, they appeared visibly uneasy. A tall man stepped forward, extending his hand. "Mr. Parker, Mrs. Parker, I'm Evan Carter, head of public relations," he said. "We've been briefed on the situation, and I want to assure you that we're taking immediate steps to address it." Jonathan shook Evan's hand firmly. "Good to hear, Evan. I expect a detailed plan on my desk by the end of the day tomorrow." "Yes, sir," Evan replied, his voice steady but his demeanor clearly shaken. Camille stepped forward, her tone calm but commanding. "And make sure those plans include real, actionable changes, not just lip service," she said. "This isn't just about Nancy. It's about the culture we've allowed to exist." Evan nodded quickly. "Understood, Mrs. Parker. You have my word." As Jonathan and Camille walked away, Nancy watched from a distance, her mind swirling. For the first time, she began to understand the gravity of her actions and the opportunity to make things right. In the galley, Nancy sat with uncertainty and determination. For the first time, she realized that this moment could define her, not by her mistakes, but by how she chose to move forward. The Ascend Airways headquarters in downtown Silver Point was a gleaming glass skyscraper, towering over the bustling city below. A symbol of corporate ambition and innovation, the building contrasted sharply with the chaos of the earlier flight. Inside, however, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Word of the incident on Flight 142 had spread rapidly through internal channels, and a heavy sense of urgency filled the air. In the executive boardroom, Jonathan and Camille Parker sat at the head of a long mahogany table, their expressions calm yet resolute. Around them, department heads and senior managers shuffled nervously, avoiding direct eye contact with the couple. The head of human resources, Miriam Steele, cleared her throat, breaking the tense silence. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker," she began, her voice steady but strained, "I want to assure you that we're taking this matter very seriously. We've already suspended Nancy pending a full review, and we've scheduled a company-wide meeting to address our diversity and inclusion policies." Camille leaned forward, her gaze sharp. "This isn't just about Nancy," she said firmly. "Her actions are a symptom of a larger problem, a culture we've allowed to fester under our leadership. That's what needs to change." Jonathan nodded in agreement. "Nancy's behavior reflects on all of us, not just her. If we want Ascend Airways to lead this industry, we need to take a hard look at the values we claim to uphold, and the actions or inactions that contradict them." As the meeting continued, the tension in the room began to shift. Department heads who had initially appeared defensive or uncertain now began nodding along with Jonathan and Camille's points. Miriam, who had been taking notes furiously, raised her hand. "With your permission," she said, "I'd like to propose a comprehensive review of our training programs, hiring practices, and customer service protocols. It's clear we need to address not just individual incidents, but the underlying biases that lead to them." "Agreed," Camille replied, "but it can't stop there. We also need a system for accountability, something that ensures real consequences for discriminatory behavior regardless of a person's position." Jonathan added, "And we'll need to involve outside consultants. It's not enough to rely on internal voices. We need perspectives that challenge us. Miriam nodded. I'll start reaching out to experts in corporate diversity training immediately. Meanwhile, in a quieter corner of the building, Nancy sat in a small conference room, waiting for her meeting with the human resources team. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her mind racing with a mix of dread and determination. The events of the flight replayed in her head like a broken record, each detail sharper and more painful than the last. When the door opened, Miriam entered, followed by a junior HR representative. They took their seats across from Nancy, their expressions professional but not unkind. Nancy, Miriam began, I'm sure you know why we're here. The events of Flight 142 have raised serious concerns about your conduct and its alignment with our company's values. Nancy nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I understand. Miriam leaned forward slightly, her tone softening. I need to ask you a difficult question. Do you believe your actions were rooted in bias? Nancy hesitated, the weight of the question pressing heavily on her. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. Yes, I didn't realize it at the time, but I let my assumptions cloud my judgment. I see that now. Miriam studied her for a moment before nodding. Acknowledging that is the first step. The next is deciding how you'll move forward. Later that afternoon, the corporate communications team gathered to address the growing public attention surrounding the incident. A draft press release lay on the table, carefully worded to acknowledge the incident without admitting liability. Camille picked up the document, reading it silently before setting it down with a frown. This isn't enough, she said firmly. We're not here to protect our reputation. We're here to make a change. A real statement, Camille Parker said firmly, setting the draft press release back on the table. The head of public relations, Evan Carter, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. What are you suggesting? He asked, though he likely already knew the answer. I'm suggesting transparency, Camille replied. We own up to what happened, explain how we're addressing it, and invite our customers to hold us accountable. Anything less will come across as empty words. Jonathan nodded in agreement. This isn't just about damage control. It's an opportunity to lead by example. Evan sighed, clearly uneasy, but after a moment he nodded. I'll revise the release by the end of the day. A new strategy was taking shape. The leadership team outlined a plan that delved far deeper than surface-level fixes. Ascend Airways would implement mandatory diversity training across all departments, establish a task force to address systemic issues within the company, and encourage employees at every level to participate. Regular updates would be shared with the public to ensure transparency and accountability. As the meeting concluded and the team dispersed, Camille turned to Jonathan. Her voice was quiet but resolute. This is just the beginning. Jonathan smiled faintly, nodding. The beginning of something better. The first round of diversity training began the following week. Among the attendees was Nancy, who sat quietly in a circle of other employees. Her heart pounded as she clutched a notebook to her chest. She had decided to stay and face the process, but she had no idea what awaited her. The training room was a stark departure from the sleek boardrooms and bustling terminals Nancy was accustomed to. The plain walls and simple chairs arranged in a circle created an unassuming space. A whiteboard at the front displayed the words, "Diversity and Inclusion, Embracing Change." The environment was designed to strip away hierarchy and foster open dialogue. Nancy entered hesitantly, her steps faltering. Around her, employees from all corners of the company, pilots, flight attendants, and administrative staff, trickled in. Everyone wore name tags identifying them by first name only, emphasizing equality. Today, no one's rank mattered. Nancy chose a seat near the back, hoping to remain inconspicuous. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, noting the variety of expressions, curiosity, skepticism, and even outright hostility. A young man across the circle caught her gaze and offered a tentative smile. She managed a weak one in return before quickly looking away. The session began as a woman with an approachable demeanor stepped to the front. Her name tag read Lila, and her voice was calm but firm. "Good morning, everyone," she said. "Thank you for being here. These conversations aren't easy, but they're necessary." Gesturing toward the whiteboard, Lila continued, "Today, we're here to talk about assumptions. How we form them, how they influence our actions, and how we can challenge them. Let's start with a simple question. What assumptions do you bring into this space, and how might they hold you back? At first, the room was silent. Nancy avoided making eye contact, her mind racing. What assumptions? Too many to count, she thought grimly. Finally, a man in his 50s wearing a pilot's uniform broke the silence. I'll admit, he began, when I first heard about this training, I thought it was just another corporate box to check. But after what happened on Flight 142, I've realized I've been ignoring some things I shouldn't have. Several heads nodded in quiet agreement. Nancy felt a pang of guilt as the memory of that flight resurfaced, vivid and raw. As the discussion continued, the guarded atmosphere began to lift. Employees started sharing personal stories, times when they had been on the receiving end of bias, or, in some cases, when they had unintentionally perpetuated it. Nancy listened intently, her notebook lying untouched in her lap. Then Lila turned to Nancy. Nancy, would you like to share your thoughts? The room turned toward her, and for a moment, Nancy felt as though all the air had been sucked from her lungs. She hesitated, every instinct urging her to deflect. But then she remembered Jonathan's words on the flight. Acknowledging the problem is a start. She took a deep breath and began, her voice shaky but steadying as she spoke. I've made assumptions about people, she admitted. I let those assumptions dictate how I treated them, and on Flight 142 I hurt people because of it, Nancy admitted, her voice trembling but clear. The room was silent, every eye on her as she swallowed hard and continued. I told myself I was just doing my job, but the truth is, I wasn't. I let my biases take control, and I didn't even realize it until it was too late. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, but it created space for others to speak. After Nancy's admission, the discussion deepened. Employees began opening up about their own experiences with bias, creating a raw and honest atmosphere. A young flight attendant shared how she had struggled with unconscious stereotypes when serving passengers from different cultures. A mechanic spoke about feeling overlooked because of his accent and background. The group leaned into vulnerability, the conversations laced with both pain and hope. Lila, the facilitator, guided the dialogue skillfully. It's not just about individual behavior, she said. It's about recognizing how our systems reinforce these biases and committing to changing them. Nancy found herself nodding along, her resistance giving way to a growing sense of accountability. She realized this wasn't just about making amends for her actions, it was about becoming part of the solution. Toward the end of the session, Lila addressed the group. In the coming weeks, we'll be holding smaller discussion groups. These will need leaders, volunteers to guide their peers. Would anyone like to step forward? The room went quiet. Participants glanced at each other, waiting for someone else to take the lead. Nancy felt her pulse quicken. She knew what she needed to do, but fear gripped her. Then, almost without thinking, she raised her hand. I'll do it, she said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. Lila smiled warmly. Thank you, Nancy. Leadership starts with courage, and this is a courageous step. As the session concluded, Nancy lingered, watching her colleagues mingle and exchange thoughts. The young man who had smiled at her earlier approached, his expression thoughtful. What you said today, it meant a lot, he said. It's not easy to admit when you're wrong. I respect that. This time, Nancy managed a genuine smile. Thank you. It's not easy, but it's necessary. Later that evening, Nancy sat alone in her apartment, reflecting on the day. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead would be daunting, but she wasn't running from it anymore. She had made a commitment, not just to Ascend Airways, but to herself. Nancy stood at the front of a training room, her name tag now reading, Diversity Trainer, Ascend Airways. Her demeanor was confident yet humble as she adjusted the microphone and scanned the room. It was filled with new employees, seasoned veterans, and executives. Among them were Jonathan and Camille Parker, seated quietly near the back, their expressions warm but expectant. Good morning, Nancy began, her voice steady. I want to start by sharing a story about a mistake I made and the lessons I learned from it. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on her as she recounted the events of Flight 142. She spoke candidly about her assumptions, the confrontation with Jonathan and Camille, and the personal and professional impact it had on her. I thought I was protecting the integrity of first class, she admitted, her voice tinged with regret. But what I was really doing was upholding my own biases. That day, I hurt people, and I realized I needed to change. As Nancy continued, she shifted the focus from her own journey to the broader transformation of Ascend Airways. She highlighted the success of the Elevate initiative, which included mandatory diversity training, anonymous employee feedback channels, and a scholarship program for underrepresented communities pursuing careers in aviation. It's not just about changing policies, she said. It's about changing mindsets, building systems that support equity, and ensuring that every voice is heard. The room remained silent as Nancy finished her story, but the expressions on the audience's faces spoke volumes. Jonathan and Camille exchanged a quiet look of approval as the room erupted into applause. Nancy stepped back from the podium, her heart swelling with both pride and humility. As employees began mingling after the session, Nancy found herself approached by several colleagues expressing their gratitude. One flight attendant shared how the training sessions had opened her eyes to her own unconscious biases. A mechanic talked about how the scholarship program had given his niece a chance to pursue her dream of becoming a pilot. Jonathan and Camille approached Nancy last. Camille spoke first, her voice kind but firm. "You've come a long way, Nancy." Nancy smiled, her gratitude evident. "Thanks to the two of you. You didn't just hold me accountable, you gave me the opportunity to grow." Jonathan nodded. "Accountability without compassion doesn't lead to transformation." "You earned your place here, Nancy." The event concluded with testimonials from employees, community partners, and scholarship recipients. For many, the celebration marked not just the company's progress, but a commitment to continued growth. Later, Nancy stood alone in the training room, tidying up after the event. She picked up her name tag, running her fingers over the words, "Diversity Trainer." For the first time, she felt a deep sense of purpose. The journey wasn't just about redemption. It was about using her experiences to help others unlearn their assumptions and challenge their biases. Nancy smiled to herself, knowing that her story and Ascend Airways was just beginning. "It's worth it," Nancy concluded, her gaze sweeping across the room. Today, Ascend Airways isn't just a better company, it's a better community. As Nancy stepped off the stage to resounding applause, Jonathan and Camille Parker exchanged a quiet look of approval before standing to join the rest of the room in recognition. Employees approached Nancy with gratitude and admiration, their faces reflecting the impact of her words. "You've come a long way," Camille said warmly when they finally reached her. Nancy smiled, her expression genuine. "Thanks to you both. You didn't just hold me accountable, you gave me the opportunity to grow." Jonathan nodded, his voice steady but kind. "Accountability without compassion doesn't lead to transformation. You earned your place here." The celebration continued, with breakout sessions where employees shared how the company's cultural shift had touched their lives. A young mechanic described how the scholarship program had allowed his sister to attend aviation school. A flight attendant spoke about how the training sessions had opened her eyes to her own unconscious biases. Even longtime employees admitted that the changes, though initially uncomfortable, had made them better colleagues and better people. Amid the discussions, Miriam Steele, the head of human resources, approached Jonathan and Camille. "I just wanted to thank you both," she said earnestly. "What started as a difficult moment has become a turning point for this company." Camille smiled. "It was never just about that one flight. It was about creating something bigger than ourselves." Jonathan added, "The real credit goes to everyone who embraced the change. Culture shifts don't happen because of mandates. They happen because people care." As the event wound down, Jonathan and Camille stepped outside to admire the city skyline. The crisp autumn air carried hints of the changing seasons. Camille slipped her arm through Jonathan's, her voice soft. "Do you think it's enough? What we've done here?" Jonathan was quiet for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "It's a start," he said finally. "But change isn't a destination, it's a journey. As long as we keep moving forward, it'll always be worth it." Inside, Nancy lingered in the now empty training room, tidying up after the event. She picked up her name tag, running her fingers over the words, "Diversity Trainer." A faint smile crossed her face as she thought about how far she had come and how far she still had to go. For Nancy, the journey wasn't just about atoning for her mistakes. It was about using her experiences to help others unlearn assumptions, challenge biases, and embrace change. She had learned that real transformation begins with one courageous step. Months later, Ascend Airways was recognized on a global stage for its leadership in equity and inclusion. As Jonathan and Camille prepared for a press conference, a young intern approached them, her eyes wide with admiration. "How do you keep pushing for change when it's so hard?" she asked. Jonathan smiled, his tone both thoughtful and reassuring. "Because every step forward is a step worth taking." The Grand Ballroom in New York City buzzed with anticipation. Conversations swirled among industry leaders, media representatives, and Ascend Airways employees. This wasn't just another corporate event. It was a celebration of transformation, a testament to what a company could achieve when it chose to lead with integrity and courage. At the center of it all stood Jonathan and Camille Parker, the driving forces behind Ascend Airways' evolution. Behind them, a massive banner read, "Elevate together, transforming the skies with equity and integrity." Jonathan stepped forward, adjusting the microphone. His calm yet commanding voice filled the room. "Good evening. When Camille and I started Ascend Airways, we had a dream. A dream not just of transporting people, but of connecting them. We believe that every passenger, every employee, and every partner deserve to feel valued and respected." He paused, letting the words sink in. But a year ago, we faced a hard truth. We weren't living up to those ideals. The incident on Flight 142 was a wake-up call, not just for this company, but for Camille and me personally. It forced us to confront uncomfortable realities and acknowledge that good intentions are not enough. Camille stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. "That's why we launched the Elevate initiative. It wasn't just about addressing one incident, it was about redefining who we are as a company. We committed to listening, learning, and leading by example. And while we've made progress, tonight isn't the end of our journey. It's just another step forward." As Camille and Jonathan spoke, Nancy sat in the audience, reflecting on her own role in the company's transformation. The journey had been challenging, but it had also been deeply rewarding. She felt pride, not just in the company, but in herself. When the Parkers finished their speech, the room erupted into applause. Jonathan smiled, stepping back from the podium. "But instead of telling you what we've done, I'd like you to hear from someone who embodies the spirit of this transformation." He gestured toward the audience. "Nancy, would you join us on stage?" Nancy rose to her feet, her steps measured yet confident. A year ago, she could never have imagined standing here, let alone speaking to a crowd of this size. But now she understood that growth required vulnerability. And she was ready. Taking the microphone, she began. "A year ago, I made a mistake. A big one. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment, and I hurt people because of it. But thanks to this company's leadership and their commitment to accountability, I was given a chance to learn and grow." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "Today, I'm proud to be part of a company that doesn't just say it values equity, it lives it. Change isn't easy. It's messy, uncomfortable, and sometimes painful, but it's also necessary, and it's worth it." The applause that followed was thunderous, a reflection of both Nancy's courage and the company's transformation. For Ascend Airways, this wasn't just the conclusion of a difficult chapter. It was the beginning of a brighter, more equitable future. "This wasn't about damage control," Camille Parker said, her voice steady as she addressed the audience. "It was about redefining who we are as a company. We committed to listening, learning, and leading by example. And while we've made progress, tonight is not the end of our journey. It's just another step forward." As Camille spoke, Nancy sat in the audience, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and humility. She thought back to the training sessions she had once dreaded, the moments of raw self-reflection that had been both painful and transformative. She had come a long way from the person she was on that flight. The journey had not been easy, but it had undoubtedly been worth it. Camille continued, her gaze sweeping the room. "Change is never easy. It's uncomfortable, messy, and sometimes it feels impossible. But it's also necessary. Tonight, we celebrate not just what Ascend Airways has achieved, but the people who made it happen, the ones who chose to embrace discomfort, to confront their biases, and to believe in a better future. The applause that followed was thunderous, filling the ballroom with energy. Jonathan stepped back to the microphone, smiling warmly. "Instead of just telling you what we've done," he said, "I'd like you to hear from someone who embodies the spirit of this transformation." He gestured toward the audience. "Nancy, would you join us on stage?" The room quieted as Nancy rose from her seat. Her steps were measured but confident. A year ago, she couldn't have imagined standing here, let alone speaking to such a crowd. But now, she understood that growth required vulnerability, and she was ready. "Thank you," Nancy began, gripping the microphone. Her voice was steady. "A year ago, I made a mistake. A big one. I let my assumptions and biases cloud my judgment, and I hurt people because of it. I thought I was just doing my job, but the truth is, I was failing at something much bigger. Treating others with dignity and respect." She paused, scanning the audience. But thanks to the Elevate initiative and the guidance of leaders like Jonathan and Camille Parker, I was given the opportunity to learn and grow. Over the past year, I've confronted not just my actions, but the beliefs that shaped them. It's been one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it's also been the most rewarding. The audience listened intently as Nancy's voice grew stronger. "Today, I'm proud to be part of a company that doesn't just say it values equity, it lives it. And I'm grateful for the chance to help others see that change is possible, no matter where you start." As Nancy stepped back, the applause was overwhelming. She glanced at Jonathan and Camille, who nodded in approval. In that moment, she felt a deep sense of redemption, not just for herself, but for the company she now proudly represented. The evening concluded with heartfelt testimonials from employees, community partners, and scholarship recipients. Each story spoke to the tangible impact of Ascend Airways' efforts. One young pilot, the first in her family to enter aviation, shared her experience. "I used to think this industry wasn't for people like me," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "But Ascend Airways showed me that there's a place for everyone in the skies." The room erupted into applause. Camille leaned toward Jonathan and whispered, "This is why we do it." Jonathan smiled, "And we're just getting started." Months later, Nancy stood in the aisle of an Ascend Airways flight. Her uniform was crisp, her demeanor calm, and her tone genuine as she greeted passengers warmly. "Good afternoon. Welcome aboard," she said to a middle-aged man who hesitated at the door. The man glanced at her, his expression skeptical. "This is first class, right?" Nancy met his gaze steadily, a smile on her lips. "Yes, sir. And we're honored to have you here." As the man nodded and moved to his seat, Nancy felt a quiet satisfaction. She had faced her biases, owned her mistakes, and come out stronger. Every interaction was now an opportunity to embody the values she had once overlooked. Back at Ascend Airways headquarters, Jonathan and Camille prepared for another meeting. A young intern approached them, her eyes wide with admiration. "How do you keep pushing for change when it feels so overwhelming?" she asked. Jonathan smiled, his tone gentle but firm. "Because every step forward, no matter how small, is a step worth taking. And because when you believe in something bigger than yourself, you find the strength to keep going," Camille Parker added with a warm smile. The intern nodded thoughtfully, her admiration clear. Jonathan glanced at Camille, his expression filled with determination. "Let's get to work," he said firmly. "The sky is not the limit, it's just the beginning." On an Ascend Airways flight a few weeks later, Nancy greeted passengers as they boarded. Her uniform was crisp, her smile genuine, and her tone welcoming. "Good afternoon. Welcome aboard," she said, assisting a family with their luggage before moving to greet another passenger. As she worked, Nancy reflected on how far she had come since that fateful day on Flight 142. Walking away from her past biases had not been easy, but she had embraced a new mission: to inspire change, one interaction at a time. Her journey wasn't just about redemption. It had become a powerful reminder that growth is possible for anyone willing to take the first step. Nancy's story became more than just a personal transformation. It stood as a testament to the power of accountability, empathy, and the courage to confront assumptions. Her actions and the cultural shift at Ascend Airways proved that fairness and equity aren't just lofty ideals, they are values that must be lived every day. Her journey serves as a reminder to all of us. Real change doesn't begin with grand gestures, but with small, brave steps. If you were in Nancy's shoes, how would you confront your own biases and make things right? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to like and share this video to help spread the message of growth and equality, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.